Welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. I'm Bob Delaney, Executive Director of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. Labor Vision, a production of the Institute, focuses on topics of importance to working Rhode Islanders. We hope you enjoy this edition.
Welcome to Labor Vision, the at-home edition. I'm your host, Autumn Giat, and with me today is Majority Whip Catherine Kazarian, House sponsor of the Let RI Vote Act, and Marcela Betancourt, I might have pronounced that incorrectly, Director of the Latino Policy Institute and spokesperson for the Let RI Vote campaign. Hi, Marcela. Hi, Representative. How are you guys?
Hi, Autumn. Good, thank you.
Good. So we're here today because we're continuing with the conversation we've been having on Labor Vision about labor's legislative priorities. And I'm really excited to talk about the Let RI Vote Act and how it will help Rhode Islanders and how improving voter access will help workers. I was wondering if Representative Kazarian, if you could do just a brief overview of what this bill is and why you decided to sponsor it.
Yeah, absolutely. So very excited about the Let Rhode Island Vote Act. Excited about the team we have working together, the group of advocates, my companion in the Senate, Senator Oyer, as well as the Board of Elections. We've all really been putting our heads together for a couple of years now, and really excited about the bill that we have before us. The main part or the main theme of this bill is about making voting more accessible to all voters here in Rhode Island. And I like to break it down by saying it has three parts. The first part, making voting more accessible by putting the three different ways people can vote. So voting early in person, voting by mail, or voting in person on election day, all on an even playing field, making them accessible to everybody. The second thing this bill does is it gets rid of that pesky signature, the mail ballot, the
Witnessing.
The witnessing, exactly. The signature, the notary signature witnessing that people have to pay for, or requiring them to go out and get the two signature verification, the witnesses on there, gets rid of that. So people don't have that burden on them to be able to vote by mail. And then the third thing that it does is it actually makes our elections more secure by requiring the Secretary of State's office to check the voter rolls 4 times a year.
Wow. Yeah, that's really great. I mean, when we talk about, again, this is Labor Vision, so I always have to recontextualize things for working class issues, but voting rights and voter accessibility really do go hand in hand with labor rights, right? So just last year in 2020, we saw 19 states pass more than 34 voter suppression laws. And at the same time this is happening, we saw some very big national stories about corporations using union busting tactics to deny workers a voice on the job, literally for voting. When you talk about the effort to organize at Amazon in Bessemer, Alabama, they actually have triggered a re-election. The NLRB has triggered a re-election there this month because it was found that Amazon was not only participating in your standard union busting activities of forcing workers to go to anti-union meetings and making false claims about how it's going to reduce their pay, but also telling workers that voting by mail is dangerous. And so they hampered with the voting process when they were trying to organize a union. And I was wondering, like, as we look at it from a more Rhode Island perspective, Marcela, could you tell us a little bit more about the campaign to get this bill through in Rhode Island?
Yeah. So the campaign has been supported by several groups, almost 40 groups that make the Rhode Island Voting Access Coalition. And we have groups that represent over 250,000 Rhode Islanders from diverse communities in the state. And some of those include the Latino Policy Institute, some of the AARP, the Rhode Island Latino Political Action Committee, the Women's Fund, and many, many others that represent, again, different communities, diverse individuals, working families, children. And so I think that is a really important part of what has made our coalition and hopefully this campaign successful this year. Because together we've been able to bring in some of the experiences of our communities, as you just shared, of why this is a workers' rights issue as well. And so it has been a really important thing. And just to add also, the Voting Access Coalition is also supporting, in addition to the Let Rhode Island Vote Act, which was introduced by Representative Kazarian, there's another legislation that it would introduce same-day voter registration. It's a resolution introduced by Senator DeMario and Representative Bia. And so this would actually put a question in the ballot in November, asking Rhode Islanders to amend our state constitution to allow the General Assembly to change voter registration deadline. What does that mean? It means that, thousands or hundreds of Rhode Islanders would actually be able to register to vote the same day that election is happening. Right now, there's about 26 states across the country that have same-day registration. And, similarly to a lot of the priorities in Let RI Vote, this can really be a very impactful thing for Rhode Islanders and voting access.
Absolutely. I mean, when we talk about making voting easier, we're talking about especially re-enfranchising like historically marginalized people, women, minorities, the elderly, people with disabilities, young folks, and putting hindrances on their abilities to vote. Like if they're not registered for whatever reason, we're talking about taking away their workers' voices at the most basic level when we're at the ballot. I'm wondering what else, Representative, you might be able to talk about some other key ways the Let RI Vote Act improves voter access.
Well, I always think about my constituents on election day in 2020 and how excited they were to be able to make their own plan for how they wanted to vote in that election cycle. I think about the working moms that have to coordinate childcare. I think about my seniors who maybe only get a ride certain days of the week and have a hard time scheduling a ride to the polls on election day. I think just about, even the average worker who might get an extra shift and have a quick change of plans that day on election day. I hear from a lot of them during the 2020 election about how wonderful it was. They didn't forget to vote. You didn't have to make a tough decision and they weren't able to vote that day. Really being able to choose either to vote early in person 20 days before an election, being able to vote on a weekend early in person, really helped them make sure that they were able to cast their vote in the 2020 election. And we all know how important it is to go out there and vote. We know it's so important because for decades people have been trying to take away our right to vote. And like you said, Autumn, there have been so many initiatives throughout the other states trying to suppress people's right to vote. So being one of the states that's working on making voting and voter accessibility, more, putting more laws on the books that makes voter accessibility important and out there and available to everybody has been great. And I'm excited about hopefully getting this bill done so that come this 2022 election cycle, people can continue to vote the way that they did in 2020.
Love that. Is there anything else, Marcella, that you want to add about accessibility, or what else gets you excited about this bill?
Absolutely. And I think just to underscore what Representative Kazarian mentioned, there is such a big part of our coalition that is really worried that if we do not pass Let RI Vote Act this year, there are so many Rhode Islanders that, as the representative just mentioned, got used to in 2020 to being able to vote by mail or voting a few days in advance, right? Early voting was a big thing in our state during 2020. And for example, my parents were, they're in their 60s, and it was the first time, actually for my mom, was the first time voter after becoming a citizen. And it was really important to her that she was able to vote early. Again, they were in their 60s in the middle of a pandemic. It was so much easier to be able to do it safely at City Hall just a few days before. like my parents, there are so many other Rhode Islanders that, that have to work because Election Day is not a holiday, that do not have, as Rep also mentioned, they don't have access to childcare, et cetera. There's so many other reasons why voting early or through mail is necessary, but there's going to be so many people that if we do not pass this and ensure that it is ready by Election Day, they could miss that deadline. Another really important thing that was a really great thing that happened in 2020 through the 211 in United Way. They had a multilingual line where individuals, depending on whatever language they spoke, were able to call and ask for information about voting, right? Where do they have to go to either register? Where do they have, where do they have to vote, period? Are there any questions on the ballots, et cetera? So I think having this hotline was a really, really important thing in 2020, again, because it was such a difficult year. And this year, through Lara I Vote Act, this would become a permanent hotline. And I think that can be really impactful for our families in Rhode Island.
Totally. So we've talked a little bit about like the finer nuances in the bill. We've talked about early voting and how that will expand access. I'm wondering also if you both could speak to how when the bill provides that you will no longer require voters to have an excuse to vote by mail or vote early, how does that also expand access for workers and for voters?
That's a great question. So prior to 2020 elections, if you wanted to vote early in person or you wanted to vote by mail, you would have to attest that you had an excuse, you had a valid reason. You had to sign that this reason was accurate by penalty of perjury, I believe. And there were a lot of people that felt very uncomfortable by that. Maybe their worker shift would change and they didn't see that as being a good enough reason to ask for a mail ballot. Or again, like we said, childcare maybe wouldn't be available to them. They didn't see that being a good enough reason. So making all three forms of voting equal, getting rid of that requirement to have an excuse, gets that feeling away from voters, really allows them to have all three options available to them, and then choose whichever one works best for them.
Absolutely. And I think I would quickly just add on to that. I think that by taking some of these barriers down, we're also providing a really great example for future generations. So because, either voting early or doing it through mail, my favorite part was to see, parents kind of, sharing this with their children. And I think that that's really important when we talk about, civics, education, and access. I think this is a really important thing, making sure that our future voters understand that when it comes time for them to kind of do their civic duty of voting, that they know when they can do it, how they can do it, and that there are no restrictions to them depending on where they live or when they want to vote.
Actually, Marcy, I just want to say you're completely right about that. I feel lucky. My mom always took me into the voting booth with her. I was so excited to be able to vote for my first time, on my own. And we want to make, exactly like you said, we want to make voting accessible. We want to make people comfortable with the concept of voting so that they will participate and they will exercise their voice. So right on the money with that.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was away before I moved back to Rhode Island and started this work, I had to get a mail ballot for the 2020 election. And I was actually living with a family with small children. So it was really fun. Like my ballot came in the mail and they're like, oh, Mama, let me see it. And so I got to go through and be like, oh, this is what we talked about delegates, right? To the convention. This is the primary. And I explained to him what it was like to or why we would have to have people from our state go to this convention and be delegates and everything. So you have time to really go into the finer details of how our democratic process works too, when it's just sitting in front of you and you're making this decision. So yeah, and I mean, true. It definitely, you have more time than when you're squeezed into the booth with your parents trying to look over and see what box they're ticking.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of components to this. I think I would also love to speak a little bit more about how removing the requirement for voters to have a witness or a notary signature will also improve access?
Another great question, and this is a big part of the bill. So in 2020, we removed that requirement because of COVID, for the pandemic reasons. But again, heard great feedback from our constituents about not having to wait in line and maybe pay for somebody to notarize your ballot for you, or somebody coming to your door and saying that they can notarize your mail ballot and having all the complications that comes with. That process. We also worked really closely with the Board of Elections on this, and they were great. And they told us that they do not check the notaries. They don't call those notaries up and check and make sure that they did all the proper methods for checking if this person was that person. They don't check the witness signature requirements either. They only check that one signature on the mail ballot, which is the voter signature. They have an incredible process to go through. We actually did a tour. They showed us how they're trained by the FBI to check these signatures and make sure they match. And another great thing with our state departments all becoming more technologically savvy or more in tune is that we have all of these signatures on file, and they're able to look at your signature through all the different state documents that you've been signing and use those to compare to the one on your voter ballot, your voter mail ballot, and make sure that it matches. So again, getting rid of this does not do anything to harm the security of our elections. It doesn't, hurt anything in the security of Rhode Island elections. But it does just make it easier for people to vote by mail, make the process more accessible to them, and really make it so that they're the only person touching that ballot, which I think is key. And again, if somebody did, unfortunately, if somebody forged a signature or forged a ballot, that would get caught at the Board of Elections when they go to verify those signatures. And they're, like I said, very good at it and have showed us a couple of examples. So their process works, and I'm happy to have this in there so that voters can vote by mail confidently and without the hassle.
Cool.
That was
So,
a long answer.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, the common theme here, I think, is easier, right? Like, it's all about just making this not such a heavy ask for voters to bring more and more people into the process. Part of that was the drop boxes. I love them. I wanted to talk a little bit more about how they work and how they help voters using a mail ballot.
So this bill also makes it so that those drop boxes are permanent. And this, again, we worked with the Board of Elections on it. They are secure. They have cameras on them 24/7. They are in each city and town throughout Rhode Island, also at the Secretary of State's office. Again, if you have your mail ballot, you want to be able to drop it off. We want to make sure that whole process is accessible to you, and making sure that mail ballots are a permanent fixture here in Rhode Island during the elections and are accessible to everybody depending on where you live is important, and it's included in the bill. So we're excited about that as well.
Cool. So I'm wondering too, this bill will create a new online option to request a mail ballot. Marcella, maybe you can comment on this first. How does this help voters?
I think this is probably one of my favorite parts of it. And mostly it is because, as Rep. Kazarian just mentioned earlier, so many things are done online now, right? And the fact that we still have to print out an application to ask for a mail ballot is a little hard. And the reason it's like, I don't have a printer at home. My job
Most millennials don't. Though.
Yeah, no, I don't. I remember, yeah, and so one of our other partners in the coalition is Jim Vincent from the NAACP, and even he was like, I also don't have a printer. So right, our generation doesn't have it. Our parents' generation. So I would have to print it for myself, my parents, imagine. And so I think that again, it's an accessibility thing. I can do it from my phone. I should be able to do it from my phone, just requesting a mail ballot right before the deadline. We're doing, online, like automatic voter registration passed a few years ago, and that was huge, right? And it's happening all over the country. And so I think that something like this, where you can just check a little box. You can already, register to vote online. So I wouldn't be able to do it as a registering to vote, just to get our mail.
The joke in my house is if you have a printer, you don't have ink. If you have ink, you don't have the printer. which has always been real for us. So yeah, and I would have to second that. As soon as I need to do anything, I'm looking it up on Google, and making that application process available to people online, I think is again hitting home that idea of making voting more accessible to people in Rhode Island. I will add again, the security level is there as well. You do have to add in your Rhode Island state ID number, and you do have to have a signature on file. If you do not, you have to go down to your Board of Elections and go through that whole process in person with your ID. So the security is still there. It's just, again, making that process more accessible for people.
Cool. Yeah. And I'm sure it will save some offices paper and ink, because everything I have to print, I print at work. So
Yeah. That's a good
yeah. So there, it's pro business as well. So I'm wondering, as we're talking about this, we're trying to let people know as much as possible about the bills and the provisions here. What can people at home do to support the Let RI Vote Act?
I love it when I hear from constituents on issues. So call me, email me, better yet, come to the hearing, submit testimony to the hearing. Let us know how you feel. Let us know how you voted in 2020. Let us know that you support the bill. That support goes a long way. I know for myself as a legislator, and for so many other legislators that I work with. So we want to hear from you, and please reach out.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a really important thing. And if you want to learn more about, some of our coalition members, and, if you want to go to our hearing, which would be a House hearing in the weeks to come, our coalition is happy to help through the process of writing testimony, of kind of understanding, if you have never been to the State House, which I'm sure many of the people who are listening and watching to this have, but the State House can be a little bit intimidating sometimes. So we're always happy to help. Definitely make sure to visit our website, which is www.letrivote.org. And I think that could be really, really important. And as Representative Kazarian said, make sure that you're calling your senators, your representatives, and telling them how important this is.
Yeah, and don't be nervous when you come to the State House. We are so thrilled to have members from the public come and join us to submit their testimony. I know the building is big and it can be a little nerve-wracking, and I certainly feel that way sometimes too, but there's nothing like having constituents come and testify on a bill. So please come, please join us, and let us know how you feel and how we can help.
Absolutely. And as always, I will be linking all of the suggestions here in the bio and the show notes, so that you can just click and go, signing on and saying that you support the bill. This has been such a great conversation. I am so glad to have had both of you on, and hopefully we can have you on again. Are there any final thoughts, anything you would like to plug before we finish up?
I wanted to quickly just mention, and one of the big parts of this legislation that sometimes we need to kind of bring up again, because there's so much misinformation regarding voting access bills. And so a big part of Representative Kazarian's bill is about voter list maintenance, which is really important. So what that means is that right now the voter rolls, like the list of voters, is only cleaned it's pretty often, but not so often. This legislation would make it happen 4 times a year. That's a really big deal. And so, we hear all this misinformation about too many voters are dead, people that don't live here anymore. Well, passing this legislation would kind of put an end to some of that conversation, because this is what they would do. And I think that that's something really important that people need to hear and talk about it. Not only are we providing access to voting, which every single person should have, but more importantly, we're providing safety mechanisms around this too.
And Marcella, you're completely right. See, this is why I love being on panels with Marcella, because she's always right on the money. But for neighbors who've complained that my daughter has moved away 10 years ago and she's still on the voters list, or my mom died 5 years ago, she's still on the list. Passing this bill will make sure we're cleaning up these voter rolls on a regular basis, once a quarter, getting those names off of there, and again, heightening the security of our elections, making sure the people on the lists are the ones that can vote in our elections. So glad you hit that point home. It's all about accessibility and making sure that security is still there. It's like getting rid of the things that are unnecessary while making things more accessible. That's the dynamic that or the balance that we try to strike.
Love it. Well, thank you again. For people at home, you never have to miss a segment with Labor Vision. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Labor Vision RI. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. And as always, you can find us on our website at laborvisionri.org. All right. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision. We appreciate your input and encourage your comments. Labor Vision can be seen on this channel 3 times each week: Tuesday at 7 p.m., Thursday at 8 p.m., and Saturday at 5 p.m.